Hello, history class. This is the presentation on the history of imperialism, especially as how it's connected to U.S. history. We're going to start in the 1860s. The Civil War was over. Americans were moving out west for land, and some Americans were thinking about even getting land outside of U.S. borders. And an opportunity came in the 1860s to buy a territory called Alaska. At this time, Alaska was controlled by Russia, but Russia was having many problems, and it decided one solution would be to get rid of Alaska. It wanted to get rid of Alaska for two reasons. Number one, it needed the money. And number two, they were afraid that if the British and Canada wanted to take over the territory, the Russians really couldn't do anything to stop them. So they didn't want to just lose it, so they decided to sell it to the U.S. before anything bad happened. So the U.S. agreed, and Secretary of State William Seward got an agreement to buy it, and he sent a check of $7,200,000 to the Russians, who accepted it, and now Alaska became a U.S. territory. At the time, this was heavily criticized. People thought it was a waste of money. They joked that it was a polar bear garden and also called it Seward's icebox. But in the end, he got the last laugh when later resources such as oil and gold were discovered in Alaska. With the discovery of these resources, more and more Americans thought about going to other places in order to get resources to help make them richer and America stronger. So here we have here with my messy handwriting, the USA bought Alaska from Russia in 1867. Gold and oil were found in Alaska after 1867. You can pause it here if you want to copy these down, unless you've already written down your notes. With the discovery of Alaska, as I said, more people thought about going outside the borders to get lands and territories and resources. And one place people looked was to Hawaii. Now, Hawaii had its own people living there, and they worshipped a different religion than Americans. Americans were Christians, and Christians in America wanted to go to other countries also to convert people to Christianity. So that's what some Americans did. They went on boats, went to Hawaii, and tried to convert the people there to Christianity. And once they got there, they also set up farms and found that sugar grew very easily there. And so they started growing it, and they started putting it on ships and sending it over to the U.S. for sale, and found that Americans really liked it and wanted more. And so they started making a lot of money this way. And with money comes power. And the sugar plantation, the former missionaries, became more and more powerful. Well, this really worried the Queen of Hawaii, a lady named Queen Liliuokalani. Go ahead and say that 3 times fast. And she was concerned that they were becoming more powerful than her on her own islands. So she wanted to get rid of them. This, of course, worried them, the sugar plantation owners, so they sent requests to the U.S. government for assistance, and the U.S. government replied with U.S. Marines who went over to Hawaii, showed up with advanced weapons, and Queen Liliuokalani, who didn't want her people to suffer, realized that she was not going to win this, so she stepped down and was sent to another island to rule, and the U.S. took control of the territory of Hawaii in 1893. Now, this was important for many reasons, but one of which meaning that the U.S. now had a place to send ships on their way over to Asia, which was very desirable for many U.S. businesses for reasons I'll tell you in a moment. So here we go again. Go ahead and you can pause this if you like to copy this down, or unless you've already written it down in your notes. So how did this all get started? How did the U.S. decide that it was in their interest to go outside of their borders to find land? Well, here's the world about before 1850. You can see in Europe, it had already industrialized. There were factories there. Africa, you can see here in blue, had many resources. China, over there in the purple, had things like tea and silks and fabrics that were many Europeans wanted. And South America had just become many free countries, and so there were places like Africa and Asia, specifically China, were about the last places countries could go to get new resources or new products. As you can see here, the British flag is all over the place in Canada, India, and Australia. The British were the most powerful industrial nation at that time. So Europeans desiring resources and products went over to Africa, went over to China, and would buy resources or get resources. They would trade for silks and tea and things they all wanted, take them back to Europe, and soon either make products or sell the products, and were making money, and more people were making money doing this, and it became more and more attractive to other people. So here we go, 1850 to 1890, the Europeans again getting more powerful, and those resources were out there. And then we had the U.S. finally starting to industrialize, and they were watching what was going on in Europe very interestedly. They had just bought Alaska. And now the Europeans, who had been making deals with many of these people, decided, you know what, we're really powerful. Why do we have to make deals with them? Why can't we decide how the business deal should go? And so they started not only sending business ships and commerce ships, but also military ships. And when problems arose, which they often did, they often sent troops. And the Europeans, who of course had industrialized weapons, would win many of these conflicts, and began taking not just resources in places like Africa after many bloody battles, and China after many bloody battles. They also started taking the land itself. And you can see here that Africa is very divided. Many countries, France, England, Germany have controlled parts of it. China was not as dominated by Europe, but the major cities on the coastline were, major areas on the coastline were taken over by the British. This didn't really leave many places now for the Americans to go. And they saw that now the Europeans could go over to China and Africa and pretty much do what they want. And because of that, Europeans made even more money and were getting even more powerful. And the U.S. saw this and wanted to be a part of it. There was also many people in these places. And the Europeans who made, and the Americans who made many products, were kind of running out of people to sell them to, in a sense. So they saw China and Africa also as an opportunity not only to take things, but to send them to their colonies. So the French would send their stuff to French colonies and British to British colonies, sell them exclusively, and make even more money. So you can see here how powerful Europe is getting by doing this, and how some Americans, businessmen and government people, thought this might be something they want to start doing too. But where to go? Africa was pretty much taken. South America were independent countries, but the U.S. did have some relations with them. Australia, obviously, out of the picture. India out of the picture. Russia, you cannot go. They're a power too. So the U.S. increasingly looked to China. It wasn't completely taken over, and it had a large population. It had a lot of materials and things Americans wanted. They wanted to be a part of that market. There were still places to go there. So they started focusing on getting to China, and that became even more important when they got the Hawaiian Islands. Now they had a place for ships to refuel. And they started moving out to the Pacific. Well, this got them in conflict with a European power, which was on the decline at this time. It wasn't as powerful as it used to be, of Spain. And Spain had a territory in Asia called the Philippines. And when the Spanish-American War broke out and the U.S. defeated Spain, they also defeated the Spanish Navy in the Philippines. And so the U.S. moved in and shortly claimed the Philippines for themselves. So now we were even closer to our dream of getting into China with its many people and its many products that we all wanted to sell. This put us in perfect position when in 1900 in China there was a thing called the Boxer Rebellion. Many Chinese rose up against the Europeans and wanted to kick them out of their country or just kill them outright. And so the Europeans at this time actually weren't prepared for this, and called out for help when their embassies and their parts of the city were being attacked by the Chinese. And luckily for them, and luckily for the U.S., there were many troops in the U.S. troops in the Philippines, because for 2 years, the Americans have actually been fighting the Filipinos who wanted their own country and were very angry that the U.S. came in and took them over. So there were many U.S. troops there. So when the call went out for help during the Boxer Rebellion, the Americans eagerly accepted and went into China and fought against the Chinese in the Boxer Rebellion. You can see here the American army moving in and freeing a part of the European city that was being attacked by the Chinese. When the Chinese were defeated and the American troops were still there, now the Americans had a way to ask the Europeans to let them get into China as well and open up China. America wanted something called an open door policy in China. They didn't want any one country to control it the way they did in Africa and other parts of the world. They wanted everyone to have free access into China to trade and do business. And they got this when they helped the Europeans after the Boxer Rebellion. So here is the last piece of notes here. Sorry about the handwriting, but go ahead and fill this part out. And this is your basic, quick 10 to 12-minute history of Americans' entrance into the imperialist world.